Good morning, everybody. It's Merritt with Master of One Coaching, and I'm so pleased to be here live with my very special guest, Dominic D'Andrea, who is the New York State representative for the Dramatists Guild and a director, producer, and cultural worker, which I just love that you use that title, and also the founder of the 1 Minute Play Festival. So welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Dominic, we've been doing this for a few months now, and we come live every week, every Friday, to talk about the role of leadership in various industries and how it kind of connects the industries together in terms of how we're moving the role of leader and the title of leader forward. And so tell us a little bit about your story and background and how you came into the position that you're in.
Well, it's really interesting. I think I have a little bit of a non-traditional path. So I started in a very traditional sense where when I was a young person and I was in college and I was studying theater, I really wanted to be a director. Mm-hmm. So after college, I do what everybody did. You come to New York City and you start getting in that grind, which included a lot of assistant directing, applying for fellowships and all that kind of stuff. And I did all of the things you're supposed to do. I did Drama League. I did SDC Fellowship 3 times, which is the observership for Broadway directors. I assisted on Broadway shows, and I did regional productions, and I did educational opportunities, and I participated in Lincoln Center Directors Lab twice. And actually, we started the Directors Lab in Chicago. And just really tried to do all of the things you're supposed to do to become a professional director at that point in your career. At a certain point, I realized that the thing that I was most interested in was community. So I had this really hard pivot in 2007. We started this organization called the 1 Minute Play Festival, and it started as a project where we just got everybody in a room and said, what if we just gave everybody 1 minute to say something? What would that be like? And the result and the value of that particular project wasn't about the plays themselves, but it was about the community that space built. And we recognized the value of getting all of these practitioners and thinkers and artists in a space together and having them kind of dream big together in these little soundbite forms. And so from that, the work expanded to an annual event in New York, and then other places started to catch on to what we were doing. So I got asked by my friend who was a producer at Victory Gardens Theater to go to Chicago. I got asked by my producer friend in San Francisco if I would go out and make the work with their community at the Playwrights Foundation. And so word of mouth got out that we were creating these kind of events. And over the course of several years, we went from one annual event in New York to about 35 projects a year, where I was on the road about 30 to 35 weeks a year.
Wow.
For about a decade.
Yeah.
And just making this kind of work all the time. And that really became about centering ideas that are present in a community. So we never told writers what to write about, but we were asking them write specific moments that could only happen in the here and now. And when they submitted this work, we were looking at the themes and ideas that are sort of bubbling to the surface. And they were 10 plays about one topic, 10 plays about another topic, 10 plays about this third topic. And it might look like to the audience we had provided a theme, but actually the community is providing the theme, and we're just sort of highlighting what's sort of mapping out what's being said and offered by the community. And then we're presenting this work in this sort of rapid fire forum with 50 to 100 people as actors who are either a blend of professional actors and community members or stakeholders or non-actors who are performing for the first time. And, then we'd look at the back end of it and go what did we see? What did we hear? What did we learn? What does this say about who we are right now? And what do we do with that information? And so primarily that application was in 2 ways. One, as a citywide festival where you invite people living and working in cities into our process. And the other was sort of communities in crisis, or communities grappling with a certain point of no return. So for instance, we did a big project in Ferguson, Missouri, 1 year after Michael Brown's death in his high school. We did project in Dallas post sniper shooting. We did work in South Florida with young people, actually before, during, and after Parkland with some of the Parkland students. So we've, sometimes the way we work is about entering a community that we're invited to and kind of engaging with people to tell the stories and kind of meeting them where they are, to let them express themselves in a way that feels productive to them. And sometimes it's about trying to investigate sort of this like core sample of what's happening in the community, like getting the pulse or heartbeats of the zeitgeist in different moments. After a long time of doing that work, and I found myself living here in the Hudson Valley with my family, I asked the Dominics Guild of America, I was like, who's repping, like who is the rep for playwrights in this area? There's a lot of people. We're sort of a suburb of New York. We're sort of not really upstate as anything. Anybody in New York will say anything above the Bronx is upstate, as you know.
Yep.
And so I asked them who was sort of working with the playwrights in this area. I just wanted to know who was here and what they were doing. And they said, you are. So
Nice.
it literally like gave me this appointment, which turned into this whole like 3-year mission of trying to figure out what was going on in the Hudson Valley. Like, what was the regional identity? What were the communities working? Who was writing where? What kinds of new play projects were going on? And then sort of trying to unify that and synthesize that in a way that was sort of advocating for a more robust regional identity. Like, this is what it means to be in the Hudson Valley. It doesn't mean that we're a bedroom community in New York. It doesn't mean that we're upstate. There are people that live and work here full time. This is what's happening here. And so we were able to really turn the guild's attention and focus towards this particular region as a sort of micro region that was very rich. Culturally, I don't say necessarily financially, all some money.
It's sort of siloed, the money here, I think.
Yeah, it's very siloed. So that's the whole thing, is that there's all these silos and all these communities working that aren't aware of each other 10 minutes apart. So a lot of that work was about breaking that stuff up and getting people in the room together who thought of themselves as the only premier professional company or whatever, and they're 10 minutes away from the only other premier professional company. They don't even know each other.
Yeah.
So just making people aware and making the writers aware of these companies that are doing work and sort of getting everybody a seat at the table was that kind of mission. Eventually I got elected to the New York State position, which I never had any aspirations of doing. But I guess when you're doing the work and it's being recognized, it kind of like levels up a little bit. So now we're doing that work on a statewide level, and it's been a very big challenge to try to advocate for, like, what does an artistic community outside of New York City in the state of New York look like? What does it mean? Who are the bright spots, and what are the assets that we have? And like, how do we articulate and celebrate that? So the work we're doing is really about bringing people into that space. That's really the story from that perspective. I also work as the director of community engagement and digital programming at Queen's Theater as a day job, which, as you know, during COVID, we pivoted and made like 220 digital programs since last March.
Holy cow, that's amazing.
A lot of work. So my story was sort of like director to community worker to kind of doing other things on a policy or advocacy level, while still trying to maintain an artistic life.
Yeah, that's awesome. And also, you have a 2.5-year-old daughter and the partner, and so it's a very rich, in a different sense of the word, very rich tapestry that you've just shown us a lot. And so I entitled this "The Ripple Effect of Leadership," because, as I mentioned to you earlier when we were offline, that like I see you as going into these communities and just sort of creating this sort of mushroom cloud of effect of, like, here's, it's not just about the artistic and creative work, but it's about, like you said, bringing the communities together, how they inform each other, how they're bonded through the process of creating, and how to heal, which I didn't even realize was that aspect of your work. That makes sense. That's a really incredible, I was going to say byproduct, but it's not a byproduct. It's actually at the front of what you're doing, it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you find within yourself, like that moment when you said, when you were, going through all the different hoops of, I'm going to be a professional director, and that moment then you decided what I'm really passionate about is community. What was that moment like for you?
I think about this a lot, actually. I appreciate the way you frame this because it's not always the way that I think about it.
Hmm.
But I think what I realize is like it has a lot to do with the background, right? I grew up with a single mother, immigrant parents. Um, we struggled a lot growing up. I didn't have a lot of money. I don't come from money. We were never food insecure or anything like that, but we were financially insecure and lived in an uncertainty for most of my childhood. And one of the things that we relied on heavily when you're in that situation is a sense of community to get you
Mhm.
through, right? And I realized much later in my adult life um, that those who are really set up to succeed in, especially in theater and the performing arts, oftentimes come from like a really robust financial backing situation. Either they
Mhm.
come from a family who is artists and they kind of legacy into their role, or they have, no disrespect to anyone's work, but they have trust funds or they have financial or family backing in some sort of way. And
Patronage.
yeah, they have patronage. I didn't have those things. So at a certain point, I started to not feel outrun, but I realized that the thing that I had always known in my life to be true, which was that like community is the thing that pulls you through, actually became the thing that I led with value wise as an artist and practitioner. Um, and I didn't really catch myself doing that in the moment, but much later I realized like, maybe I wasn't meant to be a Broadway direct. Like, I don't know if the humble beginnings I have really look like the other people that
Sorry
are.
about that. It seems like we have a little bit of a connection problem. Nope.
Oh,
Are you
no.
back? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. We lost the last few seconds of what you said. So what you were talking about, patronage, and then as you were coming up, you didn't have that, and that's kind of where I lost you. So can you?
Oh, really? That long? I don't
I
know what
know.
I was saying. Yeah. No, just saying that like I recognize that people in this career path didn't have the background that I had. The people that were really succeeding were really different. And so I realized much later on when I pivoted the community, it was instinctual. Uh,
Yeah.
and I think that was the thing that really I had a profound realization a few years ago is that like I relied on something I've known my whole life to sort of build art and creative placemaking with. Um, and it might look a little bit different, but I think it's no surprise given my background and the way I grew up that I ended up working with communities as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes so much sense, actually. And really, when we think about the history of theater, it really is about community in various forms, whether it's a religious community or whether it's, tribal storytelling or, yeah, the roots of all of that is bringing community together. And then the practice of theater is also about bringing community together. So,
Yeah,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And let's talk a little bit more about, thank you for sharing that story, by the way. That's
sure.
really inspiring. I also want to, by the way, just mention that for those of you who are just joining us now or came in a little late, my guest today is Dominic Antonio D'Andrea. He holds, among other titles and roles, he holds the title of New York State Representative for the Dramatists Guild. He is a director, producer, and cultural worker, founder of the 1 Minute Plays Festival, and also working for Queen's Theater, doing a lot of digital work as through the COVID pandemic, which is very cool. A
Yeah,
totally different iteration of the work you've done. Yeah.
yeah.
So I want to move a little bit more into this social impact space because a lot of our audience and a lot of our guests are very focused on, in particular, the social impact of their work. So if you could dive into that a little bit more for me, that'd be great.
Sure. There's so much to say. I don't even know where to begin. So I think the thing that really sticks out to me about social impact is that to build community, it's a durational experience,
Mm.
right? It is not that you plop in, parachute in, colonize with values and sort of say how things are going to go. You have to really kind of come in low, make yourself available to listening, learning, put yourself in a learning position, and really do a lot of deep listening for what people are offering and sharing. So I think it's important to keep, when you're sort of trying to create space, to keep things participant centered and to keep things centered on the people that are occupying that space that you've been sort of invited into to facilitate or to work with in whatever way that you're there. And sometimes it means some difficult realizations and difficult um, uh, kind of ways of letting go and letting go of assumptions and sort of like just reinventing the wheel constantly. So being comfortable living in an uncomfortable space and recognizing that you don't have a right to comfort,
Mhm.
that you have an obligation um, to vulnerability if you're going to make change, and that isn't earned in one shot, it's earned over time. So I think that like being consistent, showing up, creating space, replicating the space you're showing up, keeping in contact with the people that you're engaging, even at times when you're not engaged with them on a sort of transactional level. That you're trying to make sure the relationships are durational and not transactional is really what I'm trying to say.
I
Um,
totally just got chills when you just said that about like you don't have a right to comfort. You have to, being vulnerable. And we talk a lot about vulnerability and leadership, but like just that statement was really powerful that you just said. I mean,
yeah,
and putting yourself in a position of vulnerability so that you are available to listen to the people who you are there to serve.
yeah, I think that there is this like we have this cultural obsession now with the idea of a safe space, right?
Mhm.
And a safe space is actually a really tricky concept to me because a safe space is earned. A safe space looks different to different communities and different circumstances. And a safe space is a really impossible thing for folks to guarantee sometimes. But the aspirational value is that everybody feels like they can be in a space and bring their whole selves to the table and contribute. So sometimes we use the terminology brave space. And
I was
sometimes
gonna say there's a risk involved there. Yeah.
there's a risk involved there. And also making clear that the difference between safety and discomfort. They're different concepts. Just
Yes.
because something is uncomfortable sometimes doesn't make it unsafe. So finding the values and modalities that support people's bravery to like exist in that discomfort is where you get the most robust kind of information or honest expression of something that can sort of carry us through to a breakthrough or to building something lasting.
As somebody who leads these kinds of conversations and creates these brave spaces, what do you think are, if you could like pull out one or two primary components of that, what do you see are the things that make the shift into a brave space for somebody?
Uh, Careful facilitation, making sure that the facilitator is not dominating the space. If you're holding a conversation with people, making sure that you're encouraging people to negotiate how to speak with each other and have a lateral conversation.
Mm.
To call out power structures in the space, whether they are racial, whether they are economic, whether they are whatever they may be in a
Hierarchical. Yeah.
hierarchical relationships, and naming them.
Hmm.
And it sometimes is impossible to dismantle those things, but sometimes in naming them, you can encourage this sort of idea of step up, step back, where you're saying if you're the person who always holds the most power, maybe challenge yourself to not lead and speak first and last in a conversation. I always notice that people in power will want to lead the conversation and they'll want to wrap up the conversation. And so we ask them not to do that. And we ask the folks who traditionally might sit back and let others speak first before you contribute something. We ask those folks to kind of be brave and contribute. So hopefully we can get an equal parts contribution from everybody in those spaces. And I realize I'm talking conceptually, but really what I'm talking about is getting people in a room, or more like during this COVID time, getting people on a Zoom
Hmm.
um, and soliciting them to speak and to share. So you have to create the conditions for for that discourse to be really honored. And for me, like those kinds of community conversations are the foundations of what you do as an artist. You build work from it, you build initiatives from it, you build relationships from it, but it all starts with people in a room being willing to share and talk. and also holding space, I guess more basically is holding space for the invitation. How do people arrive there? If you're working in a community where transportation is an issue, do you think about where you physically hold a meeting, like in someone's neighborhood that is maybe traditionally marginalized, so they don't have to travel or have any uncomfortable means of getting there? If it's a digital space, do you recognize that?
Yeah, that's a really a powerful and rats. Oh, there you are. You just got to cut out again there, but I got it that time. The transportation piece and then and being and which is an access question. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an access question, and also in digital spaces, that technology is a privilege. So, if you're going to have these conversations with a technological component, can people get on the internet? Can people get on a Zoom? Do people understand how to like turn their cameras on? And so taking the opportunity to like just taking that few moments to explain how the technology works,
Yeah.
which you did really well leading up to this. You said, here's the instructions. And but sometimes people don't have the capability to open an email and read instructions. So you have
Right.
to just call analog and go, you have to go here and you have to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to bring devices to people, which I have fortunately have not had to do personally, but I've heard a lot of stories of people either bringing devices to public spaces or making arrangements at a public space like a library or a school or something for people to use technology. And um, that's just where we are now.
Yeah. And a lot of I mean, that's what schools are dealing with all over the world, right? Is having making sure that kids who don't have access to technology can have that access. And it's not been a clean and easy process, that's for sure.
No, I mean, I see it
In
even.
the best situations, it's not.
I see kids in front of McDonald's and Starbucks on their
Yep.
laptops and stuff. And
Stealing the Wi-Fi. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think they have to.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so just imagine what that
I
means.
stealing in quotes. I didn't mean that they were being criminals. I just meant they were, using it is what I meant.
Yeah, using Wi-Fi, but I mean, it's fortunately, I think a lot of these establishments recognize what's going on, and they've been supportive
Yeah.
and not alienating of those. But also just think of all that logic to cultural spaces, and it's the same challenge.
For
Um,
sure. Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's an abundant challenge, but it is a concentrated where that challenge exists. It exists in a really major way.
And it's interesting too to think about it. I mean, it is your purview in Hudson Valley and then New York State. Like even in New York State, and certainly all over the world, there are different versions of this challenge. But we think about New York as being a pretty privileged area, the city in particular, and yet in the city, in the Hudson Valley, and in the state, there are definitely pockets of places where access is a tremendous issue. Even when there's all these resources, the juxtaposition of resources and lack of resources is astounding, even right here at home.
Yeah, it's
And I'm sure you're seeing that a lot too. Yeah.
yeah, it's becoming a lot, and access for disability,
Yep.
captioning, audio describing, Rev captioning service on no plug for Rev captioning service, but on certain plugins. I don't know if they have it on StreamYard. On Zoom, they have it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Audio describing, making sure that if you're capturing work, that you're putting the appropriate accessibility features on it.
Yeah.
And I think this moment for people who have to live and work at home for circumstantial reasons, this digital space has been a tremendous opportunity for folks to have access to things they wouldn't have access to before. So
Yeah.
nothing has a singular narrative.
No, not at all. Right. Which is part of the understanding of a person in a leadership position is to just, as you have said before, the stories that are coming to the table, everybody's got a different version of why they're there, what they're doing, how they got there, even in that moment, in that day, right? It's not just their history of their life, but it's all like what happened in the morning, what happened with their kids, what happened if they have them, what happened with their parent, whatever it is, right?
Yes.
I want to just mention one more time that we are here live on Facebook and on YouTube with Dominic here. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for those of us who have been hanging with us today live. If you have any questions or comments about for Dominic or myself, please go ahead and drop them in the chat on Facebook. I am not monitoring the chat on YouTube so much, but I'm happy to respond to those afterwards. And as we wrap up here today, our time, the next few minutes, Dominic, can you leave our audience with, I like to call it the golden nugget. Like if you can drop a little bit of wisdom for us today about your role as a leader in your community, in various communities that you serve, what would that be?
Well, I think I can code it back to something I said earlier and say that building if you are a person who has a desire to build community, it's not challenging intellectually. It's challenging durationally.
Mhm.
You have to show up. You have to be consistent. You have to keep creating spaces in the face of whatever is going on, whether it's a pandemic or a weather situation or a space issue or whatever it can be. Find a way to be consistent. And in that consistency, even at times where things feel like they might dip off in the middle, but if you find a way to be consistent in your practice with the communities that you're engaged with, ultimately it pays off almost every time.
Mm.
Um, so I would say if you're going to make a commitment to a community, make it with the intentionality of being there for the duration that you're asked to be there and that you're needed.
Mhm.
Um, it's a marathon, not a race. And oftentimes community work is not even a marathon because marathons have finish lines and community work doesn't.
Right. It's ever evolving. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you.
Maybe not like a mind-blowing one, but just a simple reminder that being consistent and showing up really is the thing that makes change.
Mhm. And that is true just about in any application.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think people get frustrated sometimes. They want to do something, they plop in once, it doesn't go exactly how they thought, and they get flustered and they give up.
Yeah. I see that a lot in entrepreneurship too. They come in, I've got this big idea. Let's do this thing. Oh, it didn't work. Oh, forget it. Never mind. I'm done. Right. Like,
I'm always critical of entrepreneurs because I always ask, like, this is a great idea, but who's asking for it?
yeah.
So I always try to ask myself the questions: for whom, by whom, to what end?
Oh, say that again. For whom?
For whom, by whom, to what end?
Yes.
I have this idea. Who's asking for it? Who's involved in the creation of that idea? And what are the goals? Like, what is it ultimately you hope to get out of that idea? Or is it just something that you perceive as a gap? And if so, like, what's the practical application for it? So I'm also looking for like the teeth and things too. Like if there are if people have these big ideas for how to make change, I'm like, that's an amazing. I hear these beautiful poetic ideas all the time from leaders about change should look like this. Leadership should be lateral and not singular or whatever. I'm like, great. How do you do that? What are
Exactly.
the steps? So I love the vision I love the aspirational vision, the goal of what you're trying to, this utopia that you're projecting.
Mhm.
Given where we are, how do we what are the steps to get there? And like, what are the consequences?
Mhm.
If things aren't put in place, and how do you institute a system of accountability and recognition for the milestones? Like, and how do you put that into play, and how do you measure that? Like, what are the things you're doing as a team to go back and look at the steps along the way and seeing if what you're doing is actually effective?
You're speaking my language, my friend. This is the work that I do all the time. I love it. Yes, absolutely. And I'm going to use that as a little bit of a platform for me to say that I have this program coming up. If you're looking to create some steps for yourself in leadership, building accountability for yourself and make some tremendous change in your own life and the work lives of others, stay tuned because my group is going to be available soon and the boot camp is available now to sign up for. So more information on that. Thank you for that tee up. I appreciate it. I know it wasn't on purpose, but it worked out well.
I love it.
All right. How can people get a hold of you if they want to engage in your creative work? If they just want to reach out to you and say, hey, you're awesome. I loved your live. What's the best way to reach out to you?
Twitter at Dominic D'Andrea, first and last name, no apostrophe.
Okay.
You can get me at New York State at dramaticsguild.com. And I'm happy to answer anyone's email that way, whether they're a guild member or not. One of the things we do is in my guild spaces, everything, unless it's explicitly like something to do with guild members, everything's open to the wider community. Nothing is just for DG members. It's a DG members and collaborators and stakeholders and anybody else.
And
So,
any stakeholder in theater is everybody, I think.
we hope so.
Right.
But it's always surprising to me who leans into that role as someone who wants to be there, and it's never always it's often never who I think it's going to be. And so it's always interesting to see who wants to come and claim those spaces. And I always welcome it, but I'm always surprised.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. This is just wonderful. It's been a while since you and I have actually seen each other.
Yeah.
So just in that capacity, it's just good to see you. And we've had some good conversations over the last couple of years, but and I'm going to be having somebody come up here pretty soon too. Brittany is going to be joining us in the next few weeks, I think, too. So
Very cool. Yeah, we just appointed Brittany as the Hudson Valley and Albany. She's sort of stepping into the role that I had previously in the guild, and she's doing really great things. So I'm glad you're talking to Brittany as well. Yeah. She's terrific.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, my friend. And so those of you who are interested in any of what Dominic talked about today, please feel free to reach out to me. And as he offered, reach out to him on Twitter or that email address he shared. And if you are interested in finding out more about the free 3-day mini boot camp that I talked about and the program that I have coming up for groups, that'll be launching the program will be opening up for spots next week on Friday. So look forward to that. And thank you again so much, Dominic. I'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.